Presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg is trying to make himself stand out. Right now, he's in a little bit of a contest with Robert Francis O'Rourke and trying to get media attention, and he has been actually very successful because he has been swiping at Democratic frontrunner Bernie Sanders. Now, recently, he went after him when it comes to the topic of electability in the general election. Now, we've heard this before. He said, quote, in a interview with the New York Times, "I have a hard time seeing the coalition ultimately coming together there." So Bernie Sanders will have a very difficult time winning the election because he can't reach out to other people. Now, read between the lines, and of course, you'll recognize that as an attack from so-called, the centrists or the corporate establishment, whose line is always on Bernie. He only appeals to the white bros, the Bernie bros. He can't build a coalition of, people of color, minorities that make up a large percentage of the Democratic electorate. All he's got is the angry white men. And so he'll have electability issues. Now, wait a minute here. That's completely wrong. We know that. First of all, Bernie Sanders, again, a lot of his his support comes from a diverse set of people, right? He's actually the most popular politician in the country still, and has fairly high favorability ratings among all demographics except for white males. So it's literally the opposite. Okay. Now, among older, wealthier liberals and older minorities, Bernie Sanders does struggle. And of course, Gen Z, younger people, and independents, I think for the most part, have yet to make up their mind on this one this time because there is such a crowded field. But I think Bernie Sanders, and this is based on evidence that I've seen, would actually do incredibly well against Donald Trump. He has a very loyal base of support, can raise a lot of money from small donors. He's actually leading the field. He's got more money than the DNC and DCCC and another Democratic organization. He's got more money than them combined. And his average donation is about $14. And that is from hundreds of thousands of small donors. And yet he still leads the field in fundraising because he has such a wide base of support. And not only that, but he's able to unite Democrats with incredibly popular policy, things that are now mainstream, Medicare for all, free college, living wage, etc. Unfortunately, I think who Pete Buttigieg is really trying to appeal to are the Pumas, right? The angry leftover Clinton voters. They make up a very small minority of Democratic voters that are very vocal when it comes to Twitter and Facebook, right? Now, thankfully, I don't think that there's enough of them to really derail Bernie Sanders if he makes it the general. Although there's a recent poll, and I don't know how scientific it was, but something like 20% of Democratic primary voters or something like that will not support Sanders in the general. Or is it 20% of Democrats that won't support Bernie Sanders in the general? Some crazy number like that. I don't necessarily believe it. I think they oversample people who are older and who are less progressive when it comes to those polls. But then again, it could be something like that because I think it was 25% of Clinton voters voted for McCain back in 2008, where you had just 12% of Sanders voters that voted for Trump instead of Clinton in the 2016 election. So there will be, I think, a significant number of people that would vote against Bernie Sanders, and that, of course, is your Pumas, right? That stands for Party Unity, my ass. So it's just going to be like the Obama-McCain voters. And, of course, I don't think they'll be able to derail Sanders because he has very, very wide appeal. But they sure are going to try. That's for sure. Now, Buttigieg also said that in 2016, voters wanted to, quote, blow up the system, saying that this mentality could lead to somebody like Bernie and it could lead you to somebody like Trump. That's how we got where we are. So let me set that straight. Bernie Sanders voters don't want to blow up the system. We want to fix the system. We want to make the system work for everybody. Now, Bernie Sanders is a capitalist. And, of course, That angers actual socialists and communists. I know, I've seen it, right? But look, Sanders has always been in favor of a capitalist country, but with a very, very generous welfare system, like some of the Scandinavian countries. You have Denmark and Finland, etc. And look, the funny thing about that is those two countries are usually listed among the top happiest countries in the world by the OECD. So Bernie Sanders wants to see our system become more like that. And that is an incredibly popular position because he's in favor of incredibly popular policies and he's been championing them for a long time. How he would not be able to build a consensus when Medicare for All polls 70% among all Americans, including somewhere around 50% of Republicans are open to the idea, maybe slightly less than that. That's crossover appeal. He does actually very well with independents as well. So, look, I don't see how that could not be a winning message, especially when we had other polls, internal polling from the Sanders camp, that pointed out that he could win, and basically he's winning by double digits against Donald Trump in a hypothetical matchup by double digits. Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. But there it is. Nonetheless, he's going to continue with these ridiculous narratives. Buttigieg also said that at the time, quote, people were refreshed by the novelty of that boldness of Sanders' ideas, but now they're less exciting. Oh, so you think that we support Bernie Sanders because of the novelty? The novelty of the idea. Now, old hat, Medicare for all, everybody believes in that, except for me. Free college, everybody believes in that. Oh, except for me, because I'm Pete Buttigieg, and I don't stand for anything. Now, look, here's the thing. Does he have a little bit of a point? Slightly, and let me actually get into that for a second. So I've seen some examples where some influencers, and I'm not saying that this is a majority of Sanders voters, but there are people that are now like, okay, sure, now that everybody has at least, when it comes to verbally and coming out, I guess, in favor of these policies, although we don't trust that they'll actually follow through, at least they've taken up and jumped on the bandwagon of supporting Medicare for all, free college, and a living wage, right? So now it is mainstream. Medicare for all is mainstream. Now that's a win. That's a win for Bernie Sanders. But Buttigieg and a lot of these centrists are saying, it's not a win. I mean, for Sanders anyway. I mean, now that everybody else believes in Medicare for all, why do we need Bernie Sanders? I mean, that was that infamous article that had came out probably a month or so ago. But see, here's the thing. I don't think that hurts Bernie Sanders as much as people believe. Because he still has positions, by the way, that also are fairly radical. Because Bernie Sanders is a radical. He's a change maker, right? And for right now, and this is considered a radical position, but it's actually not. He's getting attacked for wanting felons to be able to vote while in prison, to be re-enfranchised. Now, to us, that seems, wow, that's bold, right? Even I was like, wait a minute. But hold on. When you think about it, it's actually a pretty good policy of letting people in prison have their votes. It's consistent when it comes to people having the rights that all Americans should have. And look, another thing is that it really plays into racial justice. I mean, think about it. A lot of people in prison are African Americans, right? And a lot of prisoners, African Americans especially, are there for nonviolent drug offenses. Why are you going to take the right to vote away from them? Actually, when you think about it, when you look at it, it's kind of a way to do voter suppression. I get that prisoners will lose some of their rights. For example, the whole purpose of prison is, well, not purpose, but the whole result of prison is people losing their liberty, right? And part of that, losing that liberty, is losing the freedom to be able to go and do things. Obviously, you can't do things when you're in prison. And you also lose your ability to own a weapon, right? But that said, if you're in prison, should you lose every single right? Did you forfeit every single right? I don't believe that. And not only that, but of course, the whole purpose of prison is supposed to be rehabilitation. Now, I understand that part of it is also to keep some dangerous people off the streets. But you can't be in favor of some people in prison getting it right and others not getting their rights. No, rights are rights, which means everybody gets it. And so you can't really pick and choose who gets that right. And again, what if they did have, do a violent crime earlier in their life? They got sentenced, but in their prison stay, they had become rehabilitated. What about that? And so if you still deny them the right because of their initial crime, it gets to be a slippery slope. And after all, I ended up thinking about all that stuff and agreeing with Bernie Sanders. Buttigieg does not agree with Bernie Sanders. And the discussion right now is framed, and it's so disingenuously by The Hill, for example, and other outlets, that the Boston bomber is getting the right to vote. Bernie Sanders believes that the Boston bomber should be able to get the right to vote. And that's thanks to the answer that question in the CNN town hall. So it's a disingenuous framing here, and one that is, of course, designed, crafted to be weaponized against Bernie Sanders, who basically is arguing that, no, we should be consistent. Every prisoner should get the right to cast an absentee ballot. Just because they're in prison doesn't mean they lose every single one of their rights. And at the end of the day, he's right, he's consistent. And again, if it means that, yes, if one person that is terrible gets the right to vote, but also means that thousands of nonviolent offenders also get their vote, then I'm sorry, I'm going to be okay with that. I'm going to be okay with that one terrible person getting the right to vote. And it's not as if they're going to vote, for something that's going to release all of them from prison. And I know that's a fear, right? And of course, that gets to the racial justice component here that is sadly missing in this conversation. But that's an example of a bold idea that is getting attacked by the establishment, but is now firing up some progressive voters, just like free college and Medicare for all did in 2016. So think about it, Bernie still got a few so-called radical ideas left. And so I think that whole argument that Buttigieg is using, oh, he's lost his luster, he's not sad, there are people way to the left of him now, not true at all. The only person that's really putting up a challenge to Bernie Sanders, at least when it comes to progressive policy, is Elizabeth Warren, who's been killing it. She's been killing it. But anyway, there's also something that helps Bernie Sanders here, and that is the trust, right? Bernie Sanders has been consistently for these positions for decades, and that is very important when it comes to voters. So I'm going to say that I think it's not Bernie Sanders that's going to have a hard time. I think it's Pete Buttigieg. If he becomes the nominee, he's going to have a very hard time electability. Why is that? He has no policy positions. And he's avoided talking about those policy positions. And he is what we consider a centrist moderate, which, by the way, we already ran a centrist moderate against Donald Trump. She lost. And I think his only appeal is that he is basically an impressive human being. He speaks many different languages. He's got the identity, so he ticks that box off. His husband's actually kind of cool. He can play the piano, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? But nothing that's really substantive. Nothing that's going to, policy-wise, it's going to get me to vote for this guy. In reality, I think he's an empty suit with not the best track record for when he was mayor. I mean, you've got that racist controversy involving the police in South Bend, racist policing. You had the policy on housing that created big problems for the minority community in that city. And so because of that, I think he's going to have a harder time in the general than Bernie Sanders. But you know what? It's good that we're talking about this issue, that we're vetting these candidates in a primary so that we can pick the candidate who is not only the best on policy, but the strongest to take on Donald Trump, and who can lead the Democratic Party in actually transforming this country and giving us the change that we need so that this country actually represents the people instead of just the wealthy and special interests. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality. which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent progressive media.